We actually have started. Oh, okay. So I'm gonna turn a sphere, but the main reason I'm turning a sphere is so I can show you a cup chuck. Yeah, that's all. And so I'm just going to start. I turned a lot of spheres. I turned boxes. What? Okay. I turned. Is that better? Okay. And I've turned a lot of spherical boxes. And so there's a lot of different methods for doing it. What I'm going to show you is the billiard ball method. I think the first person I saw do it was Alan Batty. And what he did was made a secret coin box. And I happen to have brought one so that you can see what it looks like. He was in Utah. Almost all this stuff is about Utah. This is kind of sort of like the box he made. No, that one. There you go. And it's just a sphere. It's got designs on 6 sides, and inside it's a little box. And this is the essentially the same one I saw him make. They used to put 1 pound coins in them, stacks of them, and they give them for birthdays or Christmas or something like that. Both he and Bill Jones made them. I watched him make them, and they made them out of white plastic, so you didn't have to worry about matching the grain. And I've been making them out of wood because I don't like plastic and I don't mind matching the grain. So he used a cup chuck. And the way you do that is you make your sphere as well as you can. It doesn't have to be perfect. It ought to be fairly close though. And so I turned this down to round. And it's 2 inches. And so I'm going to measure a length, 2 inches. And I'll mark that just so that you can see it fairly easily. And it should be, it's nice to be able to mark the halfway point, the middle. Doesn't have to be perfect. Again, you want to be fairly close. Mark that with a pencil so you can see. He brought that time. That was the lesson. And I made some spheres at home that way. One of them was a piece of walnut, a big piece of walnut that I had left too long and it started cracking. And it wasn't going to be good for much of anything else. And so I turned a big sphere with it. I think it ended up being 18 inches in diameter. And so what do you do with an 18-inch sphere? It was out of walnut. It was green still. And so I just put it down on my shop floor. And it sat there for 2 or 3 years, cracking. And it wasn't necessarily a good sphere because I hadn't, I had sanded it, but I hadn't stuck it in a cup chuck or even tried to really make it perfectly spherical. I used one of these rings to do it. And so it was close. It was pretty neat. I was pleased with it. I eventually, 3 years down the road, sanded it, put a Danish oil on it, and took it to the first show I ever had. And I just kind of figured it was a look what I can do. Someone bought it for $300. I was pretty pleased about that. So that meant I went home within a week and it turned another one. This one was out of honey locust. And when I was done with it, I put it down on the bottom, on the floor of my shop, and it sat there for a while. And I reached the point where I just decided I didn't want to turn another big sphere. And so I decided I'd make a big pawn, and that was going to be the head of the pawn. And that was my first, actually my second experience with a cup chuck. The first one I did at the tool show. And what I did was I had elm, and it was real wet, and I made a spherical box, but I glued it together. I was never intending it to be a sphere at the end, or a box at the end. And I put a sphere inside of it, so that after it was glued together, you could pick it up and things would rattle around on the inside. And I thought that was pretty cool. And I spent, a long time making it. I was using a lathe at the tool show, but I don't even remember what lathe it was. It wasn't the one that everybody was watching. And I think I probably knocked it out of the cup chuck 20 times or 15 times or something. It was, 4 or 5 inches. The next time I used a cup chuck was on this big pawn head. It wasn't spherical. It was a little elongated, kind of like this is. And I don't know. It was in October or something, and we had one of those big ice storms. And so there was a bunch of trees down, and there was a piece of soft maple. I got a trunk and brought it home, a section of trunk. And I made a cup chuck for my 14-inch sort of sphere and cut a hole in it and chased the thread in it. And I didn't knock it out once. And I guess that would have been a disaster if you knocked a 14-inch diameter piece of something out of a chuck. So the next guy I saw do this was Bill Jones. And he would come over and he would turn these amazing things, and he almost never used a chuck to hold the work. What he would do is use the chuck to hold a piece of wood that he would then hold the work with. And so he was a cup chuck kind of guy. So it looks a little long. Oh, yeah, it looks a little long, not too bad. And so what I noticed with him was he used them for almost everything. After that, I saw Mike Mahoney chase threads for the first time. I think he's the first person I ever saw chase threads. He was making a funeral urn. I'm going to tell you about cup chucks in a minute. I'm going to get this one started a little further. And so what it boiled down to, oh man, after that I saw Stuart Batty. It was the first time he demoed, I think, in Provo. I'm not, I don't know if he demoed anyplace else. I'm sure he had. I mean, he was pretty good. And what he had done is he had rough turned a piece of either ebony or it was African blackwood and sent it to Utah a year earlier. It'll probably work. And he made this amazing box. It was about 3 inches in diameter, black, thin. The thing didn't weigh anything at the end. You know, ebony or African blackwood sinks in water, so it's really dense stuff, but it didn't weigh anything when he was done. And he was the first guy I ever saw make a box. You know, I'm not talking about these secret boxes. So I'm getting ready to do something here. Well, let's make certain you've seen it. So I just turned this. I turned it as a spindle. And I'm going to turn it 90 degrees now and put it into the cup chuck. Bill Jones had a magic hammer, and what I've got is a tool handle. And so I don't know if you can see it, but here is one of the centers. And there's the other one. So it's now running at, well, won't work. It's now running at 90 degrees to what it was. And what I'm going to do is score a line in this. Doesn't really matter what you do it with. Stuart, he used a parting tool, a thin parting tool or something like that. And he actually marked the line with a pencil later. That made it easier to see. Okay, so you see how it's cut all the way through. The part that's too big just barely gets down to the side where it's the correct size. Just barely. I mean, just barely feel it. And so what's happened is I have created a circle in this direction, and it's 90 degrees to the original circle. Now, one of the things that happens about cup chucks, so I just jammed this in there, right? And it was the two long ends that were holding it. But if I try to stick it in here now, see how it's loose? And that's because this is a smaller diameter than that. As you're making a sphere, you're always making something smaller. And so your cup chuck ends up being too big. So I'm gonna make a cup chuck now so you can see how that works. These are maple baseball bat blanks, courtesy of Kevin. He finds a method for getting them, I think. What happened? Ah. Now, a cup chuck is just a jam chuck. It's a kind of a special kind of jam chuck, but it's still just a jam chuck. It holds things by friction. If you make friction fit boxes, every time you make a friction fit box, you're making two friction fit joints. And so you're already learning how to do that. And actually, that's what really got me going. I was making a lot of boxes, and then I was seeing these cup chucks, the two baddies, Stuart and Alan Batty and Bill Jones were using. I never saw an American do it. Now, the things that are important about the cup chuck is the cup chuck holds its work on this corner, just on this rim. Nothing else touches, nothing inside, nothing behind the rim touches. Let's test it. Okay, so can you see that it sticks out quite a ways from the cup chuck? You can't really from that angle, but the closer you get this opening diameter, the closer you get to the major diameter of the sphere, the better it holds. The problem is when it comes time when you're working on your sphere and it gets too small and you have to change your cup chuck, well, if you're holding it at the major diameter, you have to take a whole lot off of your cup chuck to make it fit. So the more you can have it stick out, the more economical it is on your cup chuck. One of the things I mean, I haven't learned it real well because I'm real stingy, and it leads to probably my major cause of mistakes using a cup chuck is I'm stingy with the wood. And you just have to reach a point where you say the cup chuck is perishable, just like sandpaper, and you just have to let it go. Now, I don't know if I brought a drill. Take a look at this cup chuck. Oh, there. See, there's a hole in it. That's in case I get something in the cup chuck so well that I can't get it out. You can poke it from behind with the knockout bar. My two biggest destroying a spherical threaded box when it's almost done. This is where I do it. You're getting it sanded. It's all the way in there. It's real hard. It's slick. Reach over and you grab that thing. You pull it out and it's real hard. It's real hard. And you get it out. And as you're doing that, it brings your fingers across the surface and the ball goes up in the air, goes down, hits the ground. Ebony and African Blackwood, I blew up two really nice boxes. You have one of them, right? Yeah. Okay, so how close are we? This is good enough right here. It is probably 3/8 of an inch extending out. You probably don't want to go too much more. Okay. So what makes the cup chuck work? Nothing inside touches. I'm putting this inside. It can't touch anything. If it touches something, it prevents this from holding. It's actually an interference fit. And what that means is the cup chuck, this edge of the cup chuck and the sphere are trying to occupy the same space. And so somebody is getting compressed. And if you're pressing it, if it's touching in the back here, it's not going to be holding hard enough here to compress. The next thing that really has to happen is this edge right here. This edge has to be sharp. What do you do if your cup chuck has gotten too big? You're going to cut some off the front, right? And so if you run your cut all the way across, you have bent fibers right here at the corner in, and your cup chuck will never work. And so I guess frequently when I'm cutting down a cup chuck, I will cut across it till it's almost done, and then flip it over and pull this back. And I don't know if you'll have to do this experiment on your own, but this edge, it's not flat, it's up at an angle, and when it touches the wood, it's pulling the wood back across. And so you can change the size of your cup chuck without having to recut the inside with this angle. Works real nice. Maybe not as clear as it ought to be. Okay, I don't remember. Let's cut it once more just to make it easy. You always have to remember, cup chucks are perishable. The inside means nothing. You cannot afford to have anything be on the inside, like dust. It's just death. If you're having serious trouble getting it to hold, sometimes you can use chalk, like it used to be blackboard chalk, but blackboard chalk isn't made out of chalk anymore. It's actually a clay. I wrote these down so I wouldn't miss any of them. So you have to have good wood. It's got to be solid. It doesn't have to be hard or soft. It just has to be good, clean wood. You can't have knots. You don't want flaws. You don't want anything rotten. You turn it as a spindle, right? Grain runs parallel to the bed. Thing that works is the rim. If you, I don't really make it 90 degrees. You don't make this corner 90 degrees. You could, but the problem with that is you have to cut too much of it off when you resize things. And so what you do is you cut this front flat and you let the inside be 87 degrees, 88 degrees, 89 degrees. And that way, if you cut some off the front, it's getting smaller. I actually did, sometimes I've undercut them and they hold really well, but then you have to throw them away when you're done because you can't use them for anything else. Rim should be crisp. We haven't talked about the magic hammer yet, have we? Oh, we did a little bit. Okay. Now y'all know how to make cup chucks, right? Okay. I still have that pencil line on there, and so I can orient my sphere so that it's exactly, or not exactly, as close as I can get to being back on its original orientation. It's a spindle again. I told you about Bill Jones' magic hammer, didn't I? Okay, he had a magic hammer, and I got this tool handle. I guess I could make a magic hammer too, but I'll just lose it somewhere. Bill Jones would tell these stories about these. He told them the old boys in the trade, and they were making billiard balls out of ivory. And they used these cup chucks, and they would turn them down to round, and then they would take the sphere out when it's done, and he always put them up on a shelf above his head while he was showing us. And they'd sit there for 3 months or 6 months until they had dried some, and they would have changed shape. And then he would they'd take them back and put them back in the cup chuck, and they'd turn a 32nd of an inch off and put them back up on the shelf. And let them sit for another 3 or 6 months. And they turned them 3 times. And at the end of that, they had to end up being round and the right size. So you can still see I have the slot I'm trying to minimize. About the worst thing you can do here is to cut below that line, because if you cut below it, that portion, I mean, you can't put it back. And so the only thing you can do is cut your whole sphere down the size that you went too far below. Well, I'm getting closer. It's about the same size on all sides. Well, I got to say this. I don't know who these guys were that were using these gouges to cut their 32nd of an inch off of their ivory pool balls, but I can't do it. So I use a scraper once I get a certain distance down. Notice I just keep stopping the lathe. Find out if I've got it right. Lathe never complains. What happens if you cut too far? What's the difference between, oh, just a little bit more and poop? This is tulipwood. It's a rosewood. I like it because it's colorful. It's fairly hard. It does not make me want to choke or anything like Coco Bolo can. You still see it? Yeah, see? Just a little bit. And that little bit is how far away from a sphere it is. No, one more cut. So let me show you a trick here. It's getting kind of small. You still see it there, can't you? The line. And so this needs to be cut. I apologize. Just erase that in your mind, right? This has to be cut here. This has to be cut. And this has to be cut. And so if I make those pencil lines disappear, I will be mostly cutting the places that need cutting. You know, that's the fifth law, right? Actually, it's not the fifth law, but it's kind of sort of. And so here I am in the part that doesn't need to be cut, right? I'm still touching it, but I'm touching it very lightly. And then here's where I have to cut again. Real lightly in the part that doesn't need it, and a little more firmly where it does. Let's see what we got. I still have a little nibble on the end here. That's a technical term. So, you see it? There you go. You still see it a little bit. Tiny, tiny now. And so why do you have to make one this good? Why do you have to be exact? For me, it's just, well, duh. And there's no reason I have to do it. There really isn't. But I just don't understand why I wouldn't. If you were indeed making billiard balls, it'd have to be the same weight, same size, same diameter. When you do a spherical box, a threaded one in particular, if they aren't the same all the way around, when you screw them apart or screw them together, they will wobble, like it'll be too far sticking out on one side. And when you end up, it'll be all correct, but it won't feel good when you're getting there. Stuart Batty, he was the one where I got the idea for making spherical boxes. I never really made very many friction fit ones because I was learning how to chase threads at that time, and I just threaded everything. It reached the point where I started making, anytime I got a new wood, something I'd never seen before, I would make a spherical threaded box out of it. And so I ended up with a big bowl full of them. Okay, pretty close. So, good cup chuck, huh? And so I just hit the cup chuck, right? I didn't try to hit the sphere. So I now have a true hemisphere. And remember how the chucks register on the chuck registers against the lathe? Well, the sphere registers against the cup chuck. And the cup chuck is true because I turned it that way. It hasn't had a chance to move. I turned the end of my sphere, and so it's true. Hit it with my magic tool handle, and now I have the exposed end being held and running concentrically. When you make a spherical threaded box, you do the inside first, and everything has to be measured. You have to have taken out the wood that's going to get lost when you part the piece of wood. You have to take out the part of the piece of wood that's going to be your tenon, the threaded tenon. All that has to be subtracted from the lengths of the piece of wood you're turning. And when I first started doing it, I recognized all those things had to happen, but I didn't, I wasn't experienced about it yet. And so I didn't believe it. And I would turn the two halves and I would think, no way, that just can't be right. I'm going to take some of that off. And I ended up with some funny looking boxes. Math really does work. The whole thing, just a little bit. I didn't drill this one. Too late? Ooh, that went. Okay. Now, I want you to listen close. I almost always end up leaving the equator just a hair tall. So, there. So listen close. Good. Okay. Do it one more time. Got to be real light when you do this. It's also this skew used this way is rough. There's nothing pressing against the wood except the edge itself, right? And as a consequence, when it comes around and hits that little ridge, it's a shock. And it's exactly the wrong direction. It wants to knock the sphere out. And it used to be that I would knock it out frequently right then. You can't hit it twice. It doesn't matter. You can't hit it twice. If you hit it twice, it bounces back out. I guess that's why your tool rest or your tool handle or your hammer has to be magical. It has to be right the first time, every time. And you can feel if it's not quite right. You ever have doubt about whether the cup chuck used efficiently enough, right? Because I mean, I'm not as good at it as those other guys were. I mean, I noticed, I could tell I wasn't. It's more spherical, right? It's getting real good. I could, well, okay, I know what I'm going to do. Okay, well, sorry. I want to show you another skill. It's called jury rig. I have used it a number of times, almost always, when I've made a friction fit that I'm holding an item in. It can be a box lid, or it can be, I mean, it can be a lot of things. And so what I'm going to do is cut the front off of what I'm holding with. So this was that little secret box. Think about what's happened here. I turned a sphere. Sorry, here we go. I turned a sphere. And then I have to turn the inside of it. And so how do I hold this while I turn the inside? And I used a cup chuck. Hollowed it with a round nose scraper. I actually drill this last little ½ inch, the small opening there. I don't drill the rest of it though. So I don't know what else to say. Oh, I know what to do. Sanding. I just messed up my cup chuck, so I can't sand now. Yeah, it's made out of wood. You remember, so what I just did was I cut this direction, right? That's what I was talking about before. Well, I can make this a good cup chuck again. You see it? No, try that camera. There you go. I'm turning this edge at an angle and using it to cut across the front. And that pulls these fibers out so they stay nice and clean. Now this cup chuck is too small, I think. Let's find out. No, it'll work. Okay, so I don't know how, I say this to people all the time, right? You turn fast. You run this blade real fast when you turn, but you do it real slow when you sand. That's not true of this. You could probably actually use a little piece of wood or something, like a sanding block, and glue the sandpaper to it. Because you don't want your hand to bounce in and hit the low spots. And so you go real fast and you don't press hard. and you don't want to sand very long. And you always sand in opposition. You always put it back in opposite the way you had it. Also, when I sand, how well can you sand this versus how well can you sand that? And my answer for myself is I couldn't. It would never work the same on all the places. And so I would always move my sphere in the cup chuck in 3 orientations. If I hit it too hard. Okay, put it in at an arbitrary. Something else I learned while turning those boxes, the secret boxes, the spherical boxes, you don't have the problem. You don't sand it until you're almost done, because if you sand it, it's become real slick and it won't stay in your cup chuck very well. Remember something else I was saying? Remember I talked about the blackboard chalk? The modern chalk is all clay. The chalk that you use to strike a line, a carpenter, that's real chalk. I don't use it very much. It stains the wood. I also bought a box of old chalk, school board chalk. And so I have a stash, but like I said, I don't use it very often. Something I discovered that was very interesting is a wet cup chuck. I made some out of, I made some cup chucks out of aromatic red cedar. It was green, and it's the best cup chuck I ever used. I don't like pine. The distance between the rings, the growth rings, makes them very unsatisfactory. I don't remember what kind of wood Bill Jones used. Daddy just used whatever was to hand. But if I remember right, Bill Jones used to bring his cup chucks from home. So I think that's it, unless there's some questions. And so that's 150, and I would go ahead and sand that down to probably 400. But I think I may try to make one of those secret boxes out of it. See, I saved a piece for the inside, and if I make it too slick, I won't be able to hollow it. Good.